Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Frances.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to episode 71 of Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for another amazing show. And we have a jam-packed show. Unfortunately, Chris Hanna is going to have to sit out the first part because I had some amazing discussions before the show started. Tonight, we're going to cover a couple of different things. We're going to cover International Women's Day. We're going to also cover a discussion I had with Gleb, Tsipursky, or if you want to call him, we can call him Dr. T, because I butcher his name a couple of times inside of the show. And after that, Hannah is going to join us, and we're going to have a discussion about if ghosts were proven wrong by the Hadron Collider, because I can't pronounce that either. And we're also going to kind of take a look at the giant neuron inside of the brain. But before we begin, before we start the International Women's Day thing, I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a tip, and I know you'll probably be listening to this on Wednesday, and it'll probably be a little bit too late, but they do have a strike going right now that is going to happen on Wednesday. And so with March 8th being International Women's Day, there's some groups that are now going to participate in going on strike. And basically what's going to happen is on the 21st, women are going to hopefully not show up to work. And it's not because they don't want to work or because they're lazy or because Trump wants to call them naughty word grabbers, right? Trying to be PG here, folks. And, so it's not all of that. The big thing here is that they want to be able to help create some sort of a stand-in or sit-down that will bring attention to the world. And so the whole thing there is that if we don't have, people showing up and doing these things, nobody's going to know this is an issue.
Yeah, it'll do the same thing that the immigration sit-down thing the other day with the schools would do, is it shows the import of women in the workforce. So if all of these women just simply say, we're not going to work today, we're sitting down, we're staying home, whatever we're doing, it shows the weight and the importance of them being there and being heard and being considered equal as they are.
Yes. And in an interview you're going to hear in just a second, actually, Xandi brought this up, and I did a little bit of research over the week after I interviewed her, and I said, holy crap, the strike is called A Day Without a Woman. And I posted 2 links in the description. I don't want to spend too long on this topic here, but inside of it, they actually talk about a massive success that the Women's March had. And a lot of people probably, especially on the conservative side, may not feel that, but they are using this as an international strike that's going to happen over 30 countries tomorrow. And the whole goal, again, is to literally just bring awareness to the fact that women get paid less, that women are not treated as equal. And we welcome all the hate mail. If you're listening to this and you feel that we are incorrect, I'll even debate you on the show live if that's what you would like, with statistics and facts, of course. And so they kind of talk about, some of the guidelines, and I'm going to go over the guidelines really quick, and then I'm going to get into my interview. But the basic guidelines is that women should take the day off, either paid or unpaid. Hopefully, preferably paid, but it's understandable if they can. They should avoid shopping for 1 day, with exceptions of small women and minority-owned businesses. And if for whatever reason, especially in America, we know this is hard because America is not like Europe, and we don't get days off ever, but we should be able to wear red in solidarity for women. And so for tomorrow, I've got an outfit picked out, specifically, and I'm sure I'm going to get asked about it because they're going to ask why I'm wearing all that red. And that's the whole point. I've also encouraged, women I work with to take it off, and if they need to, I will argue so that none of these issues come up. Now, obviously, that's a little bit of privilege on my side, and I hate being able to use that, but unfortunately, I'm in a position where it allows me to make certain types of statements. And I'm hoping that what this will do is that there's going to be tons and tons and tons of women that aren't going to show up to work, And what will happen is it's going to start driving a message home to the current administration, and hopefully, very shortly here, it will all change.
We sure hope so. I mean, it's going to be a battle uphill for the long term with this, especially the administration and changes the country's going through. So, without further ado, I definitely think we should get into these interviews and just let these awesome women speak for themselves.
And for this interview, we decided to talk to Miss Andersen about feminism and International Women's Day. Welcome to the show, Xandi. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am amazing. So,
Yeah.
just to give everybody a little bit of an intro, Xandi is a board member at the ACLU of Alabama. She is the president of Montgomery Humanists. She is also, we just found out a few minutes ago, she works for the Socialist Party of Alabama. Is that correct?
Yes, vice president.
You are the vice president of them.
Socialist Party of Central Alabama. We kind of established it in my living room over some cheap champagne. So that's been an adventure.
And you also have been a clinic defender for many, many years. I think that's actually why you were on the show about a year ago. We talked about some of the activism you do in helping defend women and abortion rights and reproductive rights.
Yeah, so I had an abortion here in Montgomery, Alabama at the city's only abortion clinic, which is also one of only a handful in the state. I was screamed at on my way into the clinic. And so as often as I can, I go back and try to make sure that other women don't have to experience that. So we use umbrellas to shield patients and their companions from the protesters.
With International Women's Day coming up tomorrow on the 8th of March, I wanted to have a conversation with a couple of women that were in the movement doing activism. This year's theme is Be Bold for Change. And I wanted to talk with Xandi and our future guest, Jennifer, all about how they have helped influence and be bold for change. But we can't get too far without a little bit of background from our guests.
So I grew up in a very conservative, Christian, uber religious household, and was very sheltered, very removed from the world altogether, really. I was homeschooled. I was allowed to go to church every now and then, but for the most part, I was at home, and my parents were my only influence. We didn't have TV. We didn't have access to the internet, even when that did become a thing, because I was a 90s kid. But telephones, all that was off limits for me. So it took a long time to start to unravel some of the terrible things that I was taught growing up. And most of it was patriarchal nonsense that, as I started to unravel it, I began to get extremely angry. And I guess that's what turned me into this crazy man-hating feminist person that I am now. So, no, I just, I really don't know how this all came to be, but I think the catalyst was my abortion. I think that, I knew that bits of what I thought were true were lies. So when I got out of the military, I was in the military. I left that part out. So, so when I got out of the military, I joined the ACLU, and I'm now a board member. I started volunteering at the abortion clinic and hosting rallies. We got Roy Moore removed from as Chief Justice in Alabama. So I just kind of jumped straight into activism because, and I've told people this before, I've served in the military, but I never defended anyone's rights until I got out. And sorry, not sorry, that's the truth.
It was interesting to learn that she had been involved in the military. But the more important discussion here was about allyship. International Women's Day isn't always just about women creating change. It's also about how men can be allies. And so for the first question, the big topic of the night in reference to be bold for change, which is the theme of this year's International Women's Day, I had to ask Xandi how men could be better allies.
That's a really good question, but there's a lot. Dude, there's actually a strike this year, a day without women, which strikes have been very effective. In Ireland, it was one of the ways that they were able to protest their abortion ban over there, and it absolutely got noticed. So here, with women making far less than men, and with women often working less stable jobs or hourly jobs, it's a lot more difficult to strike for a lot of women in the United States. So striking, being the privilege that it is, may not be for everyone. There are lots and lots of ways that you can show support. And one of the ways that I've seen is they're advocating for people to wear red to show support for women. So if you're not striking, or even if you are, you can wear red to show support for the women around you. And if you are able to get to a march or a rally, I know people are probably confused by the Women's March title, but plenty of men came out for those things too, and it's very much appreciated.
Yeah, we had one in Lansing, Michigan. We're from Michigan, and we had one in Lansing, Michigan at the Capitol this year. So our local CFI actually got involved and helped rally and bring people to the event as well. So tell us a little bit. You just recently joined another podcast, friends of ours over at Promoting Secular Feminism, and I think they retitled it to be Promoting Secular Feminism 2.0.
Yeah. So we have several different correspondents now. So we just kind of record our own pieces when we have time, and sometimes we'll Skype and record them together. And then kind of piece it all together before the goes live. And so it's kind of a huge mix up of sketches and interviews, and there's a book review segment, and then we've started this new thing, which was my idea, but I haven't even contributed to it yet. So, but it's drunk herstory, which is just us, and it's not always drunk, but it's us, talking about important women in history and even in current events, important current events related to women's rights. So, of course, I'll do my piece drunk when I get around to it, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun putting that together. So, and I'm making some new friends, and I have a new really cool nickname on the show.
What's the nickname?
Last name is Borshins. First name is Mora. So don't give me away. We won't. No, it's not a secret.
One of the other focuses of International Women's Day is to be able to highlight different podcasts, different events, different activists that actually affect our lives. For me, it was Promoting Secular Feminism. They're a combination of humor, their intelligent interviews, their book reviews. All of those have laid into the ability for me to be able to discover and learn more about women in activism than I can even imagine. And I can recommend this podcast for its diversity.
Yeah, I like that about it. And it's from a social justice standpoint, it's a lot more important to challenge the issues than to challenge someone else's beliefs. So, like with Montgomery Humanists and the Powerhouse, which is people organizing for women's empowerment and rights, which is right next door to our abortion clinic here. We a lot of humanist groups are secular humanism only, and they're very exclusionary. And ours is absolutely not that. We have a lot of Christian humanists and Unitarian Universalists. I actually attend the Unitarian Fellowship here in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's more instead of arguing over what belief system is right or whether or not God exists or those kinds of things. It's more important, I think, that we all hold the same values, which is, we all believe in empowering women, right? So let's work toward those common goals instead of bickering over. I mean, we still don't believe in God, right? So I'm not going to sit here and talk about that all frickin' day, because what else can I say, right?
Yeah, exactly.
and who cares?
So for the last question, I've been challenged on this, and I have a pretty open forum just on my Facebook page, and I'll post my opinions and stuff, and I've been challenged quite a bit. They don't want to consider themselves MRAs, but a lot of the arguments they use feels like an MRA position. What tactics would you take in having to have conversations with some of these people that seem to feel they're a little bit more stubborn in their belief that we've already achieved equality?
So a lot of people will say, it could be worse. Look at this other country. But, everything could be worse. And it's not whether or not it could be worse, it's whether it could be better. And if it could be better, we should always be trying to progress, right? If there's something that we see that we can change, that we can affect positively, then that's something we should be working toward. But as far as having these arguments, I'm taking a new approach. I'm trying really not to argue with anyone on Facebook. So if someone comments on something that I've posted and they want to debate it or whatever, I'm trying to move away from this call out culture that just shuts people down and forces them to feel this us versus them divide, and then they vote for Trump, and then we get to where we are today, which is partly our fault, right? So I'm trying to invite people to coffee or to get a beer, or let's talk about this in person, because it's a lot harder to say some of the things people say on the internet when you're sitting right across from somebody. People don't say some of those things in person. So, and if you know somebody that, if you know the person that you're talking to, if you know them personally, then it's not a bad idea. It's adding to your circle, getting outside of your bubble. And there's probably a handful of people in your Facebook friends list that you actually hang out with in person. And if we could expand that circle and start sharing those ideas and those values that we have and humanizing them by, hanging out in person with these people, like, hi, I'm a bisexual woman, let's get coffee, or then that puts oh, you're an atheist? I thought they, had devil horns. Like, no.
They ate babies.
So, yeah. So it's, I think that's probably going to be the best approach moving forward. And so, there are plenty of ways to argue those points, but I would say just try to humanize the issues that you yourself represent or are an ally to. And be a friend to that person instead of pushing them away with, oh my gosh, you're so stupid. How do you think that? So that's all I've really got for that. And I'll let you know how it goes. So far, a few people have taken me up on the offer, but then they haven't actually shown up. So it's like they've respectfully, declined to comment on future posts, like, oh yeah, I forgot we're going to talk about this in person, but then, we don't. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for Xandi for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
My next guest is a local favorite activist of the shows, Jennifer Beehan. We had to have Jennifer on because we wanted to talk about local activism, being bold for change right here in our backyard. And who better to talk with than the local secular leader for the CFI here right in our own backyards. I'm very privileged to be able to have this interview because Jennifer was one of my first introductions into the secular community here in Michigan. And I hold a very high respect for her as she's been able to help transform and make many people feel at home right here in the Religious Bible Belt.
Yeah, so I joined Center for Inquiry Michigan back in 2002 when it was still the Free Thought Association of West Michigan. And I started out just attending meetings. And it's interesting that you bring up the prominent role that I play now in the leadership of our local group, because when I walked into that first meeting, there were probably about 15 or 20 people there, and there were 3 women, and 2 of them were old enough to be my grandmothers, and then there was me. And the age disparity wasn't really much better on the guys' side either. And so they were very happy to encourage Jeremy and I to Jeremy's my husband, to get involved very quickly and to stay and be at the events. And we were more than happy to do so because we were still stuck in credit slavery at a local Christian college. And we clearly changed our philosophical perspective. So it was really nice to have a community at all to be able to openly express our thoughts and things that we were feeling. And so because of the importance of that community supporting us in our time of transition, as soon as I graduated college, and had more free time, I started volunteering right away. And within about 6 months to a year, I was running the website. I was doing the event calendar and helping start a newsletter. And I started running a women's group that did activities and things. And so I was just really involved. And so when we did a fundraiser to hire the first paid staff person, I was at the top of the list, of course, because I was already doing most of the job that the person was being hired for. And I also think it was really important because all the way back to the very beginning, on the first board meeting I went to, the whole board and the executive director, Jeff Seaver, who founded the group with 3 other guys, they were very, very dedicated to trying to fix the disparity of our diversity and bring in more women and get more younger people there and get more racial minorities and really be open and be a supportive community to people on all over the spectrum of unbelief, and to provide a safe space for them to be a part of. And I really valued that, and so I have worked really hard to help support that myself.
This year, the CFI has changed a little bit of its direction. They are becoming a little bit more politically activated. For example, CFI sponsored a women's march in Lansing, and it was a big push in Michigan when they had all the women's marches going around the world, I guess is probably the best way to put it, even though a lot of them were more centralized in America. Lansing had one, and I know you were a big push to get people out to come do this.
Yeah, I was really happy. The way the Women's March came together was a lot of the official platforms and positions were rather last minute. So we did have to do a lot of scrambling to get people activated to go to the marches, because we were only able to say about a week and a half or 2 weeks before the march that we officially were endorsing the march, because before that they didn't have their platform and position statements out there. And because we are a nonprofit, we had to be careful what we were signing on to. But I am very happy and very proud that CFI has chosen this year particularly to strongly increase our advocacy programming and to encourage our members to become more active in activist and political activism because we are going to have to really fight very hard for the next 4 years to maintain and keep the rights and the equalities that we've been fighting for over the last couple of decades. And I say we in the broader sense of just progressive
Society.
Individuals who want to, make the world a better place. But that's part of our core mission, though, at Center for Inquiry, is humanism and equality and making the world a better place for the most amount of people. And so we are pro-LGBTQ, we are pro-women's equality, we are pro-racial diversity and all equality all across the board, you name it. And our resources are rather limited, but I'm really happy because CFI at the beginning of this year announced that we are making advocacy our primary priority for 2017. And we have a lot of programs at the national level that they are going to be doing more legislative activities, but also at the local level, I'm working with our advisory board and starting a advocacy response team for CFI Michigan members to put people together and train them to be the first responders, essentially, when legislation comes up or when an issue arises in Lansing, to have people ready to call legislators to show up at Capitol Hill, to coordinate volunteers to make calls and different things like that. And everybody's really excited. In fact, I'm getting a lot of emails and calls from members who've been involved but on the sidelines for a long time saying, I want to get involved, I want to help. And when I tell them about our plan for our advocacy programming this year, they're just like, yes, sign me up, I'll be there. So we're starting, we're going to be launching the advocacy response team at the end of March to coincide with our first advocacy training day that we're holding on March 22nd in Grand Rapids, and then also on March 26th on Sunday morning in Grand Rapids at our Cafe Inquiry. And then I'm also going to be setting up the same advocacy training workshop over in Southeast Michigan, probably in early April. I'm working with leaders over there to get that set up right away.
With the interview winding down, I had to ask the same question I asked Xandi earlier in the show. I have to know others' opinions about how to be better allies. We wouldn't be good allies if we only listened to ourselves. To be a good ally, we need to seek out information from those around us, others that we find empowering, others that we respect. Which is why I had to ask Jennifer the exact same question I asked Xandi. How can we be better allies?
For me and for those around me, I know being an organizer, I'm actually quite surrounded by a lot of really strong and really awesome women who are more involved in advocacy than I am, and help run Planned Parenthood's advocacy programming and stuff. So I have a lot of really good examples, but I think for the everyday, couch activists out there is go do something. Sign up to go to a march, sign up to go counter protest at Planned Parenthood, just be visible. Speak up if you see someone saying a degrading thing about women, or you don't let your friends make sexist jokes. I mean, there's a lot of really simple everyday things we can do. But the biggest thing is to treat the women in your life with respect as you would think that they should be treated, and, pay it forward. The more we all work together, the more we make it unacceptable for people to make lewd comments or crude jokes about anybody in particular, but, women especially, in this case, because this is for International Women's Day, is to fight for equality and, in any way you can. I know you can do that through activism. You can also do that through volunteering. Volunteer for an organization that is supporting the goals that you want to see happen. Come volunteer at Center for Inquiry. We are very much pro-equality, and actually a vast majority of my volunteers are women. So the women are really good about getting out there and showing up. So I challenge the guys to see if you can match the women's energy and keep up the fight.
Well, thank you very much, Jennifer, for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And that concludes our International Women's Day discussions. And I'm very humbled to have been able to talk with both of these amazing women and how they're contributing to the world. And I'm even more amazed that I'm able to actually get advice on how to be a better ally. I hope everybody takes the time to stop, to listen, to go to the International Women's Day website and sign up to be bold for change. We'll be right back with Dr. T from Rational Politics Project.
Hello, I'm Miss Beehan.
I'm Demanda Wright.
And we're
Promoting Secular Feminism. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Brewpubs have always been a place to sit back, have a few drinks with friends, and talk about everything under the sun. Skeptics Brewpub is just such a place. Each week, Brother Brewer invites people to come in and talk about politics, religion, skeptical inquiry, beer, geekdom, and whatever else happens to come up that night. You can join the conversation by chat each Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Central Time on Spreaker, or catch the show later on iTunes, Spreaker, Google Play, or any other podcatchers out there. That's Skeptics Brewpub, where nothing is sacred and no conversation starts without a 2-drink minimum.
Considering how you want to help Cellar Door Skeptics, head over to iTunes or your favorite podcast app and give us a rating, because every rating helps push us in front of new listeners. And since our main goal here at Cellar Door Skeptics is to provide the most accurate information possible, we hope that more ratings will mean that more people get to hear the topics that we're presenting. We don't insist that we get a 5-star rating, but Hannah's favorite number is 5, and the more gold stars he gets, the more special he's gonna feel. So what do you say? Head on over to iTunes or Google Play, give us a rating, and help engage with Cellar Door Skeptics today.
This is Daniel from the Country Fried Free Thought Podcast. I hope you enjoy Cellar Door Skeptics as much as I do, as they help us prepare for the revolution.
Now, back to the show.
And the next guest on Cellar Door Skeptics is a guest that's been on one of my old shows, Atheist Analysis. He worked for and basically started a project called Intentional Insights. And he messaged me and reached out and said, hey, I have a new project started called Rational Politics Project. And he said, hey, I think this would fit the good scope of your show. So he sent me a little brief overview, and after looking into it, basically what it feels like the project is, and he can explain a little bit more when he joins us in a second. But basically what he explained the project to be was that we would be able to figure out what post-truths are in politics, and using rational and reasonable explanations to figure out whether people in politics are lying to us. So without further ado, please welcome my next guest, Gleb, and I'm going to butcher the name, Tsipursky, and I'll let him fix that. Gleb, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Yeah, so it's Tsipursky, but no big deal. You can call me Tsipursky if it helps.
Sorry. The gimmick on the show is I have the hardest time pronouncing people's names. We'll just put it that way. I am the worst person for that. I don't even try to sometimes.
So for people like you, I just let you call me Mr. T.
Mr. T. There you go. Thank you very much, Mr. T. So Gleb actually, he has quite a bit of knowledge. He's not just your average person trying to start a movement. Gleb is actually a PhD assistant professor at Ohio State University.
Mm-hmm.
That's
and
right, yes. What you majorly teach is history. Is that correct?
I teach the history of behavioral science. So
Yes.
the intersection of psychology, behavioral economics, cognitive neuroscience, sociology, anthropology, stuff like that, which allows me to bring this stuff into the project that I'm doing.
Awesome. Would it be better if we called you Dr. T?
Sure. Dr. T is fine. Yes.
Anyway, so you sent me an article and said, hey, I would love to come on your show. And I said, okay, hey, yeah, let's have you on because this is actually part of the discussion that we've been having over the last couple of months. Well, probably for about a year. But this specific type of conversation about fake news, fake information, fake politics, and how do we determine this, and how do we go about convincing others is actually a huge topic right now. And it's something we talk about on every show. So tell us a little bit about, we probably know what inspired you, but tell us a little bit about what inspired you to create this project and a little bit about the basis of the project.
Sure. So the project is called the Rational Politics Project. It's part of the nonprofit where I volunteer. So I'm a volunteer president of Intentional Insights at intentionalinsights.org. It's a nonprofit that promotes rational thinking and effective decision-making as informed basically by behavioral science. So it's a science popularizing organization. It unites a group of people, about 80 volunteers by now, who are committed to popularizing science in a variety of areas. And the Rational Politics Project is the focus of this Intentional Insights on politics as a whole. Now, we've been focusing a lot more energy on it since Donald Trump began running, because he brings a great deal of irrationality to our politics, much more than other politicians. So he has been termed, it's a funny factoid, Oxford Dictionary chose post-truth politics as the word of the year in 2016, due in large part to Donald Trump's election. And post-truth politics refers to politics that's characterized by appeals to emotions and personal beliefs over objective facts. So unlike previous presidents, unlike previous U.S. Major politicians, so let's go with presidents, when confronted by, when he lies, I mean, plenty of presidents lie, we know that. You know, I can't name one president who doesn't lie, maybe George Washington. But really, you know, if we look back, we can pretty much say all presidents lied. But whenever they're confronted by their lies with evidence, they back away from their lies. And they also don't lie without some, at least a shred of evidence behind it, even if it's not strong evidence. When they're confronted with their lies, they back away and they have at least some evidence for their deceptions. Trump doesn't. He didn't, you know, he sent out a bunch of tweets yesterday about Obama wiretapping him, the Trump Tower. And he called for an investigation by Congress of this issue. And the FBI department right now, I saw the headlines, is saying there's no way that happened. Essentially, it's saying, no, Trump has to withdraw that claim. No way. So his own Justice Department, which works for him, since he's the president, is, you know, FBI is saying, no, that couldn't have happened. And Trump is still insisting on it. He's tripling down. So that's one. Now, the other one is that when he's attacked when he's criticized by the media that bring out information about his lies, or by experts, bring out information about his lies and deceptions and lack of evidence, he doesn't back away. He attacks the experts or he attacks the media. So that is what makes him a post-truth president, our first post-truth president, that he doesn't back away from the lies. He doubles down, triples down. And that has a very strong impact on people, on his audience. So polls show, Gallup poll in this case, shows that trust in the media among Republicans has fallen by more than half from 2015 to 2016, September 2015 to September 2016. More than half. Right now it's in the low teens. And that's the Trump effect. That's the major cause of this. Basically, people, Republicans especially, believe Trump over the media. So he is able to undermine the only check we have on politicians lying, which is the media. Politician on the right says, the Democrat is lying. Politician on the left says the Republican is lying. We don't know who to believe. The media are the mediators. And Trump is undermining the only check we have.
Yeah, in all fairness, the media has lied too. The media has put out fake sources. They've done all that, but not to the extent that we're seeing now. I feel like we're seeing, and maybe it's just because I have a hard time with Trump, and I don't agree with most of his politics. But some of me feels that we're now getting to the point where we're actually seeing, while CNN has a slant or Fox News has a slant, we're actually seeing Trump saying, "I don't even care about your slants. I'm calling everybody fake news unless you tell me I'm really good and don't contradict me."
Yeah, so Trump has that attitude as you described. I would push back a little bit on news, even Fox News. Many of your listeners likely disagree with many things Fox News says. But when Fox News has been presented in the past with direct evidence that it lied, it drew back the story, it withdrew the story. It didn't double down. It didn't say this evidence is doesn't matter. So even Fox News drew away from lies when they were directly confronted with lies with clear evidence that they lied. Now, Trump has been confronted with lies. I mean, his lies about all the legal votes cast for Hillary Clinton is a clear example. That has been rated as false by every major fact checker, regardless of any partisan bias. Members of his own party, such as Paul Ryan and Mike Huckabee, so really prominent people, have called him out on it. And he has not backed down. Paul Ryan says he has seen no evidence of massive voter fraud. Clearly said that. Others, so prominent people in the Republican Party, so Trump's ideological allies say this, and he is not backing down. In fact, he recently appointed a federal commission headed by Pence, his vice president, to investigate these so-called voter fraud. So that is the essence. He is, when confronted with evidence, he's not backing away, which Fox did, and CNN did, and Washington Post did, and everyone that you can name. Major mainstream news do when they're confronted with evidence that what they say are lies, what they say are deceptions. So they're not. Let me say it this way: they're not maliciously trying to deceive. In other words, they may not be looking very closely at sources that agree with their ideological perspectives. But if they're confronted with a lie, with the fact that no, that source is wrong, they would withdraw that source, the story.
And I guess that's probably why the project that you have right now is very important, because we're getting into the industry, and it almost feels like so. And maybe I'm a little off topic here, but Trump's now trying to kick out major news organizations from press conferences.
He's trying to kick them out, and what he's trying to do is trying to establish himself as the sole voice of authority, as the only one who can determine the truth. So we've talked earlier about how Trump is removing the fourth estate, which was the only check, the fourth estate, the press, which was people like you and I, well, like you, I'm not the press, but people like you who are able to provide checks and balances on the credibility of the administration, on the credibility of politicians. He's creating a playing space where nobody knows what is the truth. Now, what is the danger of that? That's your listeners and I and you care about the truth intuitively. But there are very many people who don't care about the truth intuitively. And it's really hard for us to communicate and understand, to communicate with them and understand them. And organizations which try to promote reason and logic, typically, organizations like the American Humanist Association, Skeptic Society, American Atheists, and so on, they focus on doing so using debate, reason, and logic. These are things that speak to people like us, like you and I. and to your listeners, but they don't speak to, we are outliers. We are different from the typical American person, from Joe on the street, who don't care nearly as much about politics and who also don't care nearly as much about truth as we do, about truth, reason, and logic. So what the Rational Politics Project is doing that I'm running is using psychology and strategies from psychology, sociology, anthropology, behavioral economics, and a lot of these other disciplines to try to figure out how to persuade Joe on the street that truth is important, that logic is important, that facts are important, even if they don't care about intuitively about truth and the facts. And I can go into the strategies and tactics, but that is the essence of the project.
So it's
and
almost,
to provide them. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's almost kind of like, this is a little bit more atheist movement related than politics related, but it's almost kind of like when Peter Boghossian started to do his discussion points, right, where he started to have conversation with Christians in a whole different manner. And I don't think he's revolutionary in what he did, but he did popularize it, at least in the atheist community, because you had a lot of online atheists yelling, screaming, getting angry at Christians, telling them how stupid and wrong they are, and just tearing apart the Bible. But when you actually move to having a conversation with somebody, it helped them, through the Socratic method, realize they were incorrect. Is that kind of the similar strategy that you guys are using, or the folks over at Intentional Insights are using, or is it a whole different method? Yes,
so we are the folks over at Intentional Insights. So this is all part of Intentional Insights. It's a sub-branch of the nonprofit at intentionalinsights.org. Now, the Socratic method is part of the technique, but we are using more modern methods that have been shown to work more effectively than the Socratic method, which is an old classical effective method, but it's not as effective as some newer methods. And what the newer methods show is that using questioning, the Socratic method questioning, is not as helpful as modeling your audience and finding effective lines of rhetorical persuasion that connect to their values. I'll give you an example. So a lot of people who don't care about the truth so much care about authoritarianism. They don't like authoritarianism. They care about liberty. They care about freedom. They care about independence. These are things that tend to resonate, especially with conservatives. Freedom, liberty, independence. These are values they care about. So what you do when you talk to a conservative is not talk to about truth. You say, hey, you and I care about freedom and liberty and all of these things. But these are really important to us, and we don't want authoritarianism. Like, authoritarianism is bad, right? I mean, don't use quite those terms, but you know what I mean. So we don't want authoritarianism. Then you talk to them and you say, well, imagine what will happen. So we have a president who has, before the election, he has already said that, when he thought he was losing, the election is rigged. The election is rigged, it's bad. When he won, he claimed that he won the popular vote, even though all the evidence shows that he lost the popular vote by nearly 3 million. He keeps lying about it. Now he's using his federal authority to launch an investigation into voter fraud, of which his Republican backers say there is none. People like Paul Ryan and others. Now, we also have an attorney general who is accused of major voter fraud, of voter suppression, who promotes the idea of voter fraud. What's the likelihood that if Trump actually loses the 2020 vote, he will step down quietly versus accuse his opponent of massive voter fraud and then have his attorney general launch an investigation and come up and trump up some fake evidence about voter fraud? This is the situation in which we would have an authoritarian regime takeover. It's not at all improbable. It is a very reasonable scenario. And Trump is exactly the kind of guy who can't stand losing and who would take these authoritarian steps. So when you come from the authoritarian perspective, the conservatives are much more likely to hear you and be concerned about authoritarianism. A large majority of American citizens who aren't neo-Nazis don't want authoritarians.
Yeah. So
from that perspective, you are much more likely to connect with a conservative person. So you're not using Socratic method. You're going to where the conservative person's values are: liberty, independence, freedom, and then connecting that back to truth and rational thinking and logic and reason. And there are a number of similar methods, but that's just one of them.
So it's kind of like if you think about it, in the 80s, that's kind of when the LGBT movement started to get a little bit more prominent, it feels like. And then it's kind of when you knew somebody that was involved in that movement, you had a personal connection. It was easier to talk to somebody about it. For example, my parents, I grew up very religious, as everybody in the show knows. And so my parents are ultra conservatives. And when I came out as, pro LGBTQ, I came out, basically as a Democrat, and they had a hard time relating. But now, 15 years later, they're able to have different conversations they couldn't have before. And my mom's even come around to the point where she understands certain viewpoints and doesn't just strictly vote based on a Republican nature. She now considers facts and what could happen instead.
That's wonderful. Yeah, exactly. So connecting it to what people know and care about. In that case of the LGBTQ community, as well as this works for atheists as well, it's connecting it to other individuals people know and care about. Now, when you talk about truth and logic, things you want to promote, it's connecting it to values that conservatives care about. And this doesn't have to be conservatives. It can be independents who don't care about truth and politics. So connecting it to values that they care about. Now, what this takes is it takes going outside of our comfort zone. Most of us don't intuitively care nearly as much about independence, freedom, liberty as we care about truth, reason, and logic, kind of the two value sets. But people who don't care so much about truth care much more about freedom and liberty and independence. So you have to go outside of your comfort zone and go to where they are and be with them in their values and communicate to them in a language that they can hear, and then connect your points to where they are and show them how their values are going to be really harmed if they don't support truth in politics. One of the things I'm doing as part of this project is writing a book called The Alternative to Alternative Facts: Fighting Post-Truth Politics with Behavioral Science, which is forthcoming. And this book will be a manifesto and a manual for what we're calling the pro-truth movement, which will use these psychology-informed tactics to get truth into our political system in a powerful way that will be emotionally appealing and engaging to people, that will connect to their values, to whatever they care about.
So do you feel, and this is kind of something we talked about on the show when Trump won, that was very disheartening for us on the show. Neither one of us wanted to see Trump win. But one of the big things that happened is we talked about, how do we continue to keep the engagement up? How do we continue to get people to be interactive, to want to engage, to want to do these different things? And some of what you're talking about is getting people to be motivated, to care more than the, let's just say, and I don't want to say average person, but in all fairness, it's like the average person. And for example, at my work, there's a gentleman. We work very hard together. We work very well together. Completely opposite sides of the political spectrum. And it's funny because he uses some of Trump's rhetoric now that he's won that he never used in the past. And all of a sudden, one day, he made this comment about a show, and I said, well, I don't really like that show. I don't like much comedy that comes out of Fox News. Immediately, he's like, or out of Fox Network, and he immediately jumped on my throat and said, well, it's because you hate Fox News. It's like, well, no, I just don't enjoy that comedy. Like, seriously, dude, like, I just really don't enjoy that type of comedy anymore at all. But working with him, it's funny to see now that the election's over and he's won, he's disengaged in politics. He doesn't care. He doesn't stand on a soapbox anymore. And so with your project, I'm assuming that you're going to be able to offer some advice of how do we continue to engage people and get them motivated?
Yeah, I think the most important thing in helping people get engaged and motivated is helping them see that there is a way to break through. One of the things that so many people, one of the reasons I have poured a lot of energy into the Rational Politics Project and why Intentional Insights, the nonprofit I help lead, has shifted into this direction, is that there are so many people who say, oh, I've been having the same conversation with my friend at work, like you said, or my sister's boyfriend or something like that, or with people on the internet, and I tell them that, hey, this is the truth, this is reality, and they don't want to listen, and they reject this information, and people get hopeless, they lose hope, they feel that they can't make a difference. And what this project is designed to do is use the latest research on how our minds actually work and what we actually respond to try to get through to people for whom you just can't use facts and logic and reason, which is, like you said, much of the average citizenry, average Joe on the street who doesn't care so much about politics, and for whom it's not emotionally appealing to talk about truth and logic. But if you present him, if you say, hey, if you don't step up and engage, you will have an authoritarian on your hands. Like, that's something that will get people moving. And not only that, so that's kind of the inspirational part. Then it provides you with the tactics. Here are the specific tactics. Here are the things you should say to people. That's part of what this project involves, is actually, what do you say to people? How do you communicate to them? We produce a lot of memes, for example, oriented toward truth and politics. And these memes are quick, visceral ways of communicating the importance of truth. They're not partisan memes. They're bipartisan. They're not slamming Trump or anything like that. They are just kind of promoting truth and politics. So quick ways of effectively communicating these messages. We have coaching for people who want to engage in these conversations as part of this project. How do you effectively have these conversations with, your coworker or something like that, or your boyfriend or girlfriend or relative or friend or community member, in a secular group who doesn't have your values? How do you have these conversations in an effective way that they can hear you and that you can move them closer toward rational thinking and truth? So that's part of how you motivate people and engage them.
In one of your more recent articles on humanist.com, you said this. You said, simply put, Donald Trump is highly skilled at hacking our societal structures, abusing trust, and a classical use of the psychology of persuasion. Now, I'm going to take that a little bit to the right a little bit, and I want to say a lot of people vote on a two-party system. That's a fact. We know people do that. Sure. I'll be honest, I would vote outside of the two-party system for the most part if there was another candidate that I agreed with. Unfortunately for me, I didn't agree with Jill Stein or Gary Johnson in any way, shape, or form compared to Clinton. But a lot of people, especially on the right, and maybe I'm generalizing here, and that might be wrong of me to do, but it feels like on the right you get an extreme push only towards voting for a Republican. And because Trump run as a Republican, he got that. And if he understands, and which honestly kind of makes him a very intelligent person, or whoever's directing him an intelligent person, if they understand that people are only going to vote this way, that he can abuse the trust of people and say, I can do almost anything because you have to vote for a Republican. How do we fight that?
Good question. So I think what you'll notice is that a lot of people who voted for Trump are people who previously voted Democrat. So they're blue-collar workers, mosely males, who previously voted Democrats. There are plenty of people who switched, according to polls, to vote for Trump for whatever reasons. There are a number of people who chose to not go to the polls for Hillary for whatever reasons, and there are a number of people who previously didn't go vote who went and voted for Trump. So there are plenty of people who are reachable. Clinton called half of Trump's supporters deplorables. I'm not sure that's a fair characterization, but in a way, I understand what she means in terms of people who are reachable. So if we talk about people who are reachable, I'd say that it's probably reasonable to say that half of Trump's supporters, half of the people who voted for Trump, you're not going to be able to reach. But the good news is that means that half of the people are reachable. Now, the election was swung by 60,000 people in a few states. Considering that, I don't remember exactly how many votes were cast for Trump, but this was millions and millions and millions and millions of votes. So the number of people we actually have to reach to orient toward truth is relatively small. And the benefits of this project is that it's bipartisan. It's nonpartisan, in fact. It doesn't advocate voting for any party. It advocates for getting people in your own party to vote for the truth. One of the things that's part of this project is the pro-truth pledge, which we're getting politicians to sign this pledge to orient toward truth in politics. That includes things like if a fact checker disagrees with you, major fact checker, you update your position toward that of the fact checker about the truth. If you don't present any major truth claim without significant evidence for the truth claim. If a person in your party has said a deceitful thing and you can clearly see that it's false, call him or her out on this thing, and so on, a number of other things. So we're getting political candidates to sign the pro-truth pledge. Now, if a political candidate signs the pro-truth pledge and his opponent doesn't, that tells you a lot about the political candidate and the opponent. So we're basically creating ways to reward politicians for telling the truth as opposed to lying. So there are a number of incentives that we're using to move the needle toward truth in politics, both for ordinary people to get them to shift their perspectives and for politicians as well to get them to adjust their behavior by changing systematic incentives for them to do so.
Awesome. At the end of your article, you said this. You said, in order to save our democracy and prevent corruption and authoritarianism, reasonable people on all sides of the political spectrum need to adopt a focus on truth in letter and spirit as the most important component of our political system. And I think that rings very true. And it makes me feel like I need to go out of my way to reach across the aisle a little bit more, to not say the deplorable term, to not go out and make generalizations, to work harder to ensure that everybody does get a voice, because every time we continue to squash voices, look at what happens.
Yeah, I hear that. And I think encouraging other people across the aisle to orient toward the truth. One of the things I say in that article is that we need to especially call out people on our own side of the political aisle who are deceitful. And that's something I try to practice for people whose values I agree. I think that's really important, and it shows our commitment to truth in politics. It may come at short-term costs to our political values, but it has great long-term results for our political system and our credibility for cleaning up the pollution of truth in politics.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. T, so much for joining us tonight. It was a very good conversation, and we should have you back on in like a couple of months, and we should run through a couple of those scenarios that you talked about how you guys go about training people. I think that would be very interesting.
Sure. I can discuss a number of conversations I had with conservative talk show hosts where we had very productive conversations about orienting toward truth in politics as some examples. Great.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for joining us. We'll throw all the links into the description of the show, and everybody listening will be able to check out all of the different websites plus the article you wrote over at humanist.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yep. Thank you so much, Dr. T. And when we come back on Cellar Door Skeptics, I'm bringing Chris Hanna back finally to talk about an article he read on if we could disprove ghosts with the Hadron Collider, and a second article about the biggest brain neuron. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
Hello, I'm Miss Beehan.
I'm Demanda Wright.
And we're
Promoting Secular Feminism. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Coming to you from Reason Alliance Media, this is PSF, Promoting Secular Feminism. I'm Miss Beehan. Wait a minute, that was the old show. You're right, Princess Sparklefarts. A new age of PSF is upon us, and it will be so very uterific. So very uterific? Really? Your name is Princess Sparklefarts. You have no room to criticize. Our show will be returning on Galentine's Day 2017, which is February 13th, with a special episode about the Women's March in DC, where we have one of our crew marching. We'll also introduce you to the PSF 2.0 crew, Miss Amthrope, Vegeta George, Mora Abortions, Bella Constrictor, and your old favorite, Miss Behaven. Tune in on February 13th and every week after on iTunes, Spreaker, Stitcher, YouTube, on our Android app available in the Google Play Store, and check out our website for old episodes, new episodes, and the upcoming blog. There's even a post right now about what we can do to support each other and the organizations we love in facing the new regime. I'm Miss Behaven, keeping the humorous in your uterus.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking one less soda or one less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.
Hey, my name is Jeremiah. And this is David from the God Theory Podcast. And you're listening to Cellar Door Skeptics. Prepare for the revolution.
Now, back to the show.
Oh, welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all for sticking around through those amazing segments, and I wish somebody would just email us and tell me we hate you saying amazing one of these times, because it would just make me feel so much better.
So
and
should I spray paint it on your driveway on my way out of here in the morning?
It's not going to do any good, because it doesn't matter from you. I don't give a fuck what you think.
Well, you know what? I will say that your joke did fall flat during the interview there.
Yeah.
It happens. Sometimes the best stand-up comedians just don't hit on all cylinders at all times.
Yep. Speaking of stand-up comedians, the wife and I were watching a new show she recommended last night, actually, called Crashing, and it's about Pete Holmes. And
Pete Holmes is amazing. I saw him live at Laugh Fest in Grand Rapids. If anybody's interested about Laugh Fest, Gilda Radner's cancer thing, and they do comedians in Grand Rapids. Awesome segment. And total great time. But I saw him there, and he tried to riff the whole time. He came out and he said he was just going to try to riff the whole. He made it about 30 minutes before he's like, okay, I got to go back into my own material now because you guys aren't laughing anymore. He was that good. 30 minutes of just making stuff up. It was really, really good.
Yeah, so his new show is actually really, really awesome. It's kind of funny, it illuminates his divorce and stuff like that. So it's a good show, Crashing, on HBO. If you have HBO, check it out. If otherwise, download it on, I don't know, whatever app you all use.
Torrent.
Thief! All right. Speaking of which, we have some great episode ideas coming up, and we're actually going to be doing one next week. We had a listener of the show email us and tell us, hey, I would like you to do a segment on immigration and what trumps, happening to parents being separated from children.
Yeah.
So next week, we're going to rant on that.
Oh, yeah.
Because after looking into it, I was like, holy crap, that's actually a pretty serious issue. And it touches home a little bit more because of who I am and, my kids and, Hannah has kids. And we feel for all these people who are now basically being pushed into fear. But in other episodes, after next week, we won't give away next week's episode, all of it. But after next week, we are going to be talking with Jeremiah Bannister, the paleocrat, about his Teeny Tiny Dancer and the future after cancer. His daughter died tragically last year, and we kind of want to meet up with him and talk with him about what's been happening since then. After that, we're going to be talking about with a friend of ours named David Teachout. He's going to give us a little science lesson in psychology. I think on on mindfulness. He's
going to give us the whether the 1,000-yard view on mindfulness, and then he's going to talk about basically any of the, I guess, the practices that are really useful, things that we can actually apply. And then the rest of it, which is woo-woo bullshit or not.
Yes. Yep. And after that, Hannah's doing his first ever live debate.
Cramming daily, baby.
With Aaron Furlong on evolution. And we will have a page up this week to invite everybody to, and make sure you send it all out, because we will be taking live questions. We're going to try and make this a big event and everything like that. And the whole goal is to be able to ensure that everybody gets to hear whether evolution is true or creationism is true.
Ooh.
If you'd like to get an episode or a topic on the show, or you have a recommendation of somebody you want us to interview, or any books you want us to review, send us an email at cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com, and we'll ensure that we look into each one of those different topics. But without further ado, we want to talk a little bit about a couple of different things. Right, Hannah?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Some science stuff, fast and hard.
Yeah, so we're going to get a little bit into science. And you know, we had an International Women's Day segment. We love the segment. We got to talk about rational politics, about how basically somebody is now going to look and figure out how we can scientifically fight against alternative facts, i.e. Trump. And now we want to talk about the brain and a giant neuron. Did I say that right, Hannah? Did I actually pronounce it? Neuron?
I don't know. As long as you don't do the nuclear instead of nuclear, that drives me crazy. You can get the George W. Bush strategy reaction going on there. Nah, see, a giant neuron has been found wrapped around the entire circumference of the brain. So this is this just that tagline alone. So when we think of neurons, anybody remembers back to their biology classes or their basic science classes in high school? Neurons, you know, the little cells inside the brain that essentially make up all of the gray matter, which communicating back and forth through chemical impulses, the lightning, electricity, everything that's going on inside your brain is little neurons, and there's different kinds. But for the first time, scientists have detected a giant one across the entire circumference of a mouse's brain, and is so densely connected across both hemispheres that this could be an explanation for the origins of consciousness. So what we've been trying to figure out is, what is the basis for this weird interconnectivity throughout the entire brain that gives rise to a self-awareness of consciousness? And we finally have found something, potentially, this isn't exact, but this could be something that is going to give us more information as to, okay, well, everything's connected via this one special wire. Maybe that's where we get this sense of self-awareness, where everything is functioning, the engine is firing on all cylinders. So this was very interesting to me, because we'll see if it can, you know, scale up to humans. But if we can get a scientific basis for consciousness, that's the start for solving a lot of the really, really big questions that we have when it comes to leaving the scientific realm and going into that fancy supernatural area that the theologians love to say that they alone. Theologian. Oh, I just did a Tanner. You did a Tanner.
You did fantastic. You got to say fantastic.
The things that the theologians basically say they have exclusive rights to when it comes to emotions and feelings and stuff that scientists can't quantify. Well, maybe we'll find something out here. Neurologists and neuroscientists and everything are starting to make some breakthroughs.
Yep. So at a recent meeting of the Brain Research through Advancing Innovative Neurologies Initiative in Maryland, a team from Allen Institute for Brain Science described how all three neurons stretch across both hemispheres of the brain. But the largest one wraps around the organ's circumference like a crown of thorns.
They had to. Did they have to go religious, really?
They did.
They did.
And that's fine, right? It's okay. I mean, it's fine.
I can get it in the image. If you look at the image on the website, it does kind of have the thorny look to it, but still. Really?
It did. I'll tell you what, if it helps people understand consciousness better, Hannah, we can
why not?
glance over it.
I'll make a concession.
Yeah.
I'll eat some crow.
So what they did is they talked about this. Christoph Koch, president of Allen Institute for Brain Science in Seattle, Washington, explained his group's new technique at a February 15th meeting of what we just talked about, because I'm not going to repeat the whole thing, in Bethesda, Maryland. He showed how the team traced three neurons from a small, thin sheet of cells called the claustrum. Did I get that right?
Sounds good to me.
An area that Koch believes acts as the seat of consciousness in both mice and humans. And yes, there are references if you go into the article deeper. He says if you trace all the branches of a neuron using conventional method as a massive task, researchers have injected individual cells with a dye, spliced the brain into thin sections, and then traced the dye's neurons path by hand. Very few have been able to trace a neuron through the entire organ. This is a new method. It's less invasive. It's scalable. It saves time and effort. This is amazing. Right?
Yeah.
They're talking basically about the production of different, proteins that they're coloring. They're coloring proteins that are running through the brain. And they're able to see all these different interconnections, which would kind of explain if the more connections you have, right, the more intelligent you can be. So if you figure you can splice electricity in how many different ways, right, Hannah? And if you do that, you can branch it out to different parts of the brain. So if you have different parts of the brain that are able to develop and evolve in different ways and are allowed to do different motor functions, different intelligence functions, different, other functions, whatever. If you can connect all those one by one and basically have one large stream, can you imagine how easily it is to connect the dots so that it allows people to understand things differently and it allows everything to work in tandem? Now, we could say this is a happy accident, right? We could say that this is a design. We could say that. And we may need to get into that. Maybe we should get into that a little bit. Or we could say that that's the way evolution has worked, is that the fact that we've been able to take all these things and the more we've evolved and the faster we've evolved, the faster these things connect. And I would actually be more interested in to see, is there a way, that we could have done this back in the day with Neanderthals and different things like that? And obviously we can't because they're not alive. They don't exist right now.
So basically you're questioning whether or not consciousness itself is a relatively new thing.
Yes.
Would our most common or most recent ancestors, so our cousins and Neanderthals, but any of the Homo erectus or any of our most recent ancestors would be able to have our full-on consciousness like we do, but let's say obviously not as advanced, as far as our technology and our ability to do some of the things that we do now. But yeah, that's a good question. And I think the big thing here is what we're looking at is this is a discovery in mice. And so this hasn't been upscaled, like I said earlier, to humans. And so if we figure this out, so this is basically a trait in the brain as far as neurological matter is concerned, it translates into larger, more complex, more difficult to understand creatures, then obviously this is a stepping stone towards what could be a way of explaining human consciousness. If we figure out that mice using this particular, you said 3 neurons, if this specific tool in the brain is where a little bit of consciousness may rise inside mice, and maybe humans, it's a much larger, much more complex part, because I would say that the human consciousness is probably a little bit more evolved than any other primate species, and I would go even further into like rodents and any other kind of millions, and possibly even birds and stuff, because we've talked about crows being really intelligent. But I would say that whatever the organ is, or what would be the scalar for this for humans, if it's much more complex and it's much more intricate, it may be harder to find because it'll kind of mimic what our other neurological pathways look like. So this could be a nice little stepping stone. And now that we have this and we've kind of figured something out in a smaller creature, a less complex creature, we can move it up and start looking for something similar in the human brain and see if we can't figure out just learn more. The small steps is the important thing here, the slow, gradual education. And so this is an enigmatic region of the brain, and that how this specifically could relate to human experience and consciousness thought. This is, like I said, this is awesome. It's not so much clickbait as it is, there's a lot of really detailed information, and you kind of need to know, the basic science involved. So this is just a crash course on how cool we think this is, and we love just reporting good news as opposed to bad news all the time, because I love scientific discoveries making things better.
Yep. So Kosh also says this. He says the mouse body contains other long neurons, such as nerve projections in the leg and neurons from the brainstem that thread through the brain to release signaling molecules. But these clusterum neurons seem to connect to most or all of the outer parts of the brain that take in sensory information and drive behavior. He sees this as evidence that the claustrum could be coordinating the inputs and outputs across the brain to create consciousness, like we just talked about. He says brain scans have shown that human claustrum is one of the most densely connected areas of the brain, but those images do not show the individual path of neurons. Obviously, we can't inject dye into humans yet, so
Well, we
maybe
do,
when
but for like CAT scans and stuff,
Yes.
it's going to be different.
But yes, for scientific experiments, we haven't gotten that far yet.
Hey, Chris, you want to sign up for a cool after school study? Yeah, no, we're not going to be doing that, and that's one of the things that makes these discoveries in humans much more difficult. Is because we can't just plug in some Bill Bob who signs the paper away. You can't just start poking and prodding at people. So it takes longer to make the discoveries in humans.
Yep, and so there's actually a little bit of pushback on this, right? So there is a little bit of pushback. This isn't just like a universally accepted theory, right? Some gentleman named Raphael Yassit, a neurobiologist at Columbia University in New York City, he says this. He says, he does not think that the existence of neurons encircling the brain definitively prove that the claustrum is involved in consciousness. But he does say that its technique will be helpful for census efforts that identify different cell types in the brain, which many do think will be crucial for understanding how the organ functions. He says it's like trying to decipher a language if we don't understand what the alphabet is. So what he proposes now, and this is very important, right? Because he's saying, I don't disagree with it, but I do kind of. And what I want to say is that if there was more evidence, I could concede with it. So what he's proposing is that they actually could do a 3D reconstruction of individual neurons compared to analysis of genes expressed in those neurons. He says he hopes that will offer a clue to each different type of cell function.
Well, obviously, like we said, this is a small step. So this is a little bit of information that's bringing this to the attention of what you're reading from is nature.com. I mean, these are the big guys. These are the big dogs that are now taking an interest in a specific study, and they can start moving some money around. They can start getting some funding, and we can maybe solve this problem. We can. Let's face it. If Donald Trump takes the $50 billion and moves it out of the public sector and starts slamming it into the defense funding, we won't have as much funding for these kinds of studies. So other countries may be taking advantage of this information and finding out the real answer. But if we can get some good funding to possibly learn more on getting into larger scales and see if this guy's right, we can do this 3D reconstruction, then maybe we could learn this. But it depends on who can fund these really expensive scientific studies.
Exactly. And with that being said, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and I want to leave everybody with this. There is a scientist on New Scientist, right? And Helen Thompson, she said this: when the teens zapped the area with high-frequency electrical impulses, the women lost consciousness. She stopped reading and stared blankly into space. She didn't respond to audio or visual commands, and her breathing slowed.
This is a person.
So this is an experiment that had been done in a different method to try and help prove the thing that we just talked about.
Oh, so actually adding electricity to that specific region that we found this massive neuron.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to look for the research and hope that it shows that this proves consciousness. If not, we'll keep trying. We'll be right back with more Cellar Door Skeptics.
And I'm Wesley. We host the Atheist Nomads podcast.
We're godless geeks who take a skeptical look at
politics, religion, science, technology, and history.
We also interview leaders in the atheist, skeptic, and humanist community.
Check us out at atheistnomads.com.
That's atheistnomads.com.
Considering how you want to help Cellar Door Skeptics, head over to iTunes or your favorite podcast app and give us a rating, because every rating helps push us in front of new listeners. And since our main goal here at Cellar Door Skeptics is to provide the most accurate information possible, we hope that more ratings will mean that more people get to hear the topics that we're presenting. We don't insist that we get a 5-star rating, but Hannah's favorite number is 5, and the more gold stars he gets, the more special he's gonna feel. So what do you say? Head on over to iTunes or Google Play, give us a rating, and help engage with Cellar Door Skeptics today.
This is Deborah McTaggart, the voice of Beatrice Johnson from Atheist Apocalypse Podcast, and you are listening to Cellar Door Skeptics.
Now, back to the show.
And welcome back to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you so much for sticking around. If you missed the first part of the show, make sure you rewind, go back and listen to us talk about International Women's Day and our amazing interviews that we had with powerful women inside of the different activist movements that we're a part of. We also talked with Gleb Tsipursky, or Dr. T. I might actually get his name right this time, but we talked about the Rational Politics Project and how we can disprove alternative fact. We just concluded a segment talking about the giant brain neuron that Chris Hanna definitely does not have in his brain.
Nope,
not at all.
Not one bit.
And we're going to close the show out tonight. We're going to close the show out talking about if the Large Hadron Collider disproves the existences of ghosts.
Yes, the multiple existences. Now, this is Brian Cox. The Advanced Fellow of Particle Physics at the University of Manchester, and he is the British version of Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye the Science Guy. He was on BBC 4's radio show.
Did he fail as bad as Bill Nye did with his...
Nope,
okay.
That's going to be part of the Rants episode next week. Yeah, no, Chris and I both watched the same Bill Nye thing, and we both sat down and we did research on something because we were unhappy with his performance. So that's going to be something that'll be for next week. Spoiler alert. But this week with the Brian Cox, he was on a show called The Infinite Monkey Cage, and it's centered around science and the paranormal. But Cox came on the show, and he says, before we ask the first question, I want to make a statement. We are not here to debate the existence of ghosts because they do not exist. So he went on a paranormal show, and he just told them that they're wrong right out of the gate, man. He didn't take anything. No buffer, nothing. So he said, if we want some sort of pattern that carries information about our living cells to persist, then we must specify precisely what medium carries that pattern. Something has to carry that information. When he's back to the quote, he says, how it interacts with matter particles, which our bodies are made, and then we must, in other words, invent an extension to the standard model of particle physics that is escape detection at the Large Hadron Collider. This is almost inconceivable at the energy scales typical of the particle interactions in our bodies. So basically what he's saying is that if any information about us and our bodies, any kind of consciousness or soul, I'm guessing is where he's going with it, is if something transpires past our life, that it has to be carried by something, because all of our physical body simply stops working when we die. So something has to carry that information. And he says, if the Large Hadron Collider can't see it, can't find some special particle that exists carrying that information after we pass away, then it doesn't exist.
Now, with that being said, you made a very empirical statement there, sir.
I know.
You did.
Well, I didn't. That is basically...
Okay, Brian Cox did.
Yeah, yep. Brian Cox did. It was a big one. And Neil deGrasse Tyson pressed him immediately.
He did. Neil deGrasse Tyson went on to say this. He said, if I understand what you're declaring, or you just basically asserted, that the European Center for Nuclear Research just disproved the existence of ghosts. Now, you and I would probably take it a little bit farther than ghosts, right? Because I'll be honest, I did used to ghost observe. And
because you weren't a hunter.
We were not a hunter. We were not hunting them.
You were an SJW ghoster. Gotcha.
Oh, God. That was a good episode. But moving past that, if you go back to, that, I'm not as interested in the ghost aspect, right? So some aura, some part of me wants to stay on this earth for whatever reason, right? Or is trapped here. That's not very appealing to me. The interdimensional, theory where it kind of talks about, our consciousness transcending us and going to either another dimension or another, time zone, or not time zone, but another area of the universe.
You're going to go to Chicago when you die, man.
No, Jesus. But, man, don't feed this guy beers. But, in all fairness, that's a bigger theory, right?
Yeah.
Can my consciousness live on? Like, I don't want to live on as a ghost where I, walk through walls and try and scare people and get stuck in one house. I can't drink beer, can't have sex, I can't do anything. That doesn't sound fun to me. Like, I don't even want to know if that happens. I'll just let it happen if it does, and if it doesn't, great. But if my consciousness were able to transition, and basically when I died, I fell asleep and I woke up somewhere else, that's interesting to me, and that's the part of the draw of the religion. That's part of the draw of Christianity. They pull you in with this because it's the everlasting life.
Well, yeah.
And if my consciousness could live on forever, and I could just continue learning, like I know a lot of people say you'd be bored after a couple thousand years, and maybe I would.
Possibly. But
at the same token, I haven't hit that point. I
can't even imagine it, really. Like, a few thousand years of learning. As far as I know, we learn more about everything every year. So take about humans in the last few thousand years. We've learned at an exponential rate almost, but that I would still be interested if I was alive 1,000 years ago and still alive today. Like, this would be awesome. It might be a bit jarring, but I would also be existing at the same scale as far as humans have socially evolved. Back to
let's go back to the thing.
Back to ghost or whatever. I mean, Cox mentions that there's something about the substance that's driving our bodies, making the arms move and legs move, and that it must interact with the particles in which our bodies are made. So you can't have something running your arms and legs and hands and mouth and feet if it doesn't have some connection directly to the particles. So in most cases, we're talking neurons earlier, the electrical and the chemical impulses that drive these things. So he says, and seeing as we made high precision measurements of the ways that particles interact, then my assertion that there can be no such thing as an energy source that's driving our bodies, that basically an alien energy source. I would agree with him on that one. I would say that any energy source that's driving our bodies, as far as the CERN discoveries, it's going to be part of the standard model. There's not going to be anything supernatural. It's going to be part of our natural existence that we've discovered.
Yes. And in all fairness, though, Hannah, if they did discover a new particle or something, that would be changed, and that would actually become part of the natural existence, right? We would then go, okay, that's natural.
It's a modification to the standard model. And
because Cox talks about this. He says there's 4 fundamental forces, right? Gravity, electromagnetic, weak nuclear, and strong nuclear.
Nuclear.
Nuclear. I'm saying it on purpose, not just to piss you off.
Oh, man.
You should never have told me that. It is the best description of the fabric of reality that we have this far. But it is not perfect, right? Scientists consistently searching for new particles that do not fit the model. This is because they hope to break free of its strict guidelines, which have so far been unable to explain things like how classical and quantum physics fit together. Because think about it.
Yeah.
Some of the mysteries we have defy the laws of thermodynamics. Not ghosts. Well, I guess if they existed, they would. But, nobody's been able to demonstrate that. Yeah. And that's part of the unique draw to this conversation here, right? Is that essentially, at this point, ghosts have been disproved because there isn't a particle. Now, maybe we could build the Hadron Collider number 2, right? We could call it Hadron Collider 2.0. And maybe it'll be able to pick up new particles.
I think we were building one in Texas that was supposed to be significantly bigger than the one in Geneva, Switzerland, but they decided not to fund it for the United States. So this is another example of another country taking over when the United States stopped thinking science was important to fund. They decided they spend their money on war instead. But
yes,
Cox mentioned, and you mentioned a moment ago, the law of thermodynamics. This is a great example, a way to disprove. You often hear the second law of thermodynamics being used to disprove reality as far as evolution and the Big Bang. But in Cox's explanation for this, he says if ghosts existed, it would be made purely of energy because it would contain no matter, allowing it to pass through walls and do spooky things. But the second law of thermodynamics says the overall entropy or disorder, or chaos is a better way, in a system always increases with time. This means that energy would be lost to heat. So if a ghost was pure energy, it would dissipate. It itself would dissipate due to entropy, and it eventually would just poof. It would fade away to the point where it would disappear. So it could not indefinitely exist. It would just simply become less of itself until there was no longer any more of itself. That's the way the second law of thermodynamics and Murphy's law, if anybody else is a machinist like myself, have to deal with on a regular basis.
So it would almost be like it would need a constant source of energy, right?
It would need something to give it a physical basis.
So like the blasters, from Ghostbusters. It's doing the opposite because it's tracking them. Yeah, don't cross the beams. But it's doing the opposite because it's trapping them. But essentially, if you could reverse that, you could carry it around and just like shock yourself, be like, boop, there you go, I got more energy, look, I'm still a ghost. Then, okay, maybe that would happen. But I don't think there's been any discoveries that allows energy to continue. I don't think we've been able to recreate energy in the same format.
Well, that's part of the the laws of thermodynamics. So you can't create energy. All energy equalizes out. So if you remember from school when you had to deal with the solving equations, you had one side and you had an equal sign and you had another side. They have to equal out. You can't create energy out of nowhere. There's no way to create it. And then that's the first law of energy, first law of thermodynamics. The second law means that you can never have 100% efficiency. So you always lose some just to entropy. And there's no way to be 100% perfectly efficient. So you can't make the perpetual motion machine that you can turn on and it would run forever and you would have perpetual motion, perpetual energy, or whatever. And so what we're looking at is this ghosts themselves would violate some of the most fundamental laws of physics. The Large Hadron Collider is the world's largest particle accelerator used by physicists to get a glimpse of the tiniest parts of our universe. It can see how our own cells are driven by energy, and if there was a strange force driving ghost cells, we would have seen it by now. That is the basic, what people are saying is that if they understand and they know what the Hadron Collider can do, until we have new, super powerful technology compared to what the Large Hadron Collider can do in Geneva, we have to say this is the limit, and according to our abilities to measure at the smallest scale possible that we can measure, there is no medium or material that could support the idea of ghosts.
Well, that's a good point. So we just need to build a bigger Large Hadron Collider. We'll call it, what will we call it? We can't call it 2.0 because that would just be ridiculous. That wouldn't be epic. We need to call it the epically large, biglified Hadron Collider. That's what we got to call it right there.
We'll call it the Orange Trump, the Trump Collider. You know what? Why not? We'll take that $50 billion that he wants to put into building bombs and let's put it into a Hadron Collider.
There you
Why
go.
not? Why not?
Because if he could discover ghosts, he could at least put himself on the map for that, and maybe we forget about all the crappy things he's doing and do that. With that being said, if you have proof for ghosts, send it over, cellardoorskeptics@gmail.com. We'll be happy to entertain it and debunk it. But that is all from us tonight. We had a great episode. I've really enjoyed the time I've spent with you tonight, Hannah, and we're looking forward to next week already.
Likewise, fellow.
With that being said, make sure you head over to iTunes. Give us a 5-star rating. Give us a 1-star rating. We don't care. Give us any sort of a rating. And make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes, subscribe to us on Facebook, and even on Spreaker, because you'll get live updates for all the amazing live shows we do right here for you on the Cellar Door Skeptic Network. Remember, prepare yourself for the revolution. Have a good night, everyone.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker, cellardoorskeptics.com.